Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 8 of From Linear to Circular webinar series. And in the last 7 weeks, we have covered so much ground, from circular design to new business models, to next level of circular economy, to fashion, food, policymaking, plastics. And we also talked about Circulytics, our most comprehensive circular economy measuring tool for companies. And today we will turn the gaze back on ourselves, because how can one foundation, one organization aim to change the face of the entire economy? And we have just the right person to talk to us about that.
Sounds a bit intimidating when you put it like that, Ilma. Great to be back co-hosting with you. Thank you to everyone who's been contributing to the community spaces once again in between the sessions. It's great to see people responding to the prompt, and some people have watched obviously System Reset. Great responses there. And also our Monday question, which we might, we'll see how the conversation plays out, but we might be able to weave that and some of those responses directly into our conversation. But Ilma, by the way, week 8 is definitely going to be the best week on the session so far. So well done for making it to week 8, whether you're watching this live or on catch up. Ilma, but we do always need to just make sure we address, we do have some new people. Some people are still joining for the first time. So what are the slightly nitty-gritty admin points that we want to make sure we cover?
We know, Seb, that this is your favorite part of the webinar, and now you pass it on to me. But yes, for all the newcomers, so we have a Slack community, and we will post the link to the Slack community in the chat. And if you haven't done so, we really encourage you to join, because there are a lot of great discussions happening on Slack. But also you can find all the previous recordings of the sessions on the Slack community. So you can find homework, you can find information about the upcoming sessions, and also information about the very special tomorrow, but we'll mention that at the end of the webinar. Right. And maybe also just to say for the newcomers, in case you're also new to Zoom, so in order to have a chat and some discussion and comments, you can use the chat box, and make sure that you select to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your comment. But if you have a question that you want to ask, please make sure to use Q&A option, and we will try to bring as many questions as we can and ask Andrew.
So we are going to be joined, we are joined already, in fact, today by Andrew Morlet. He joined the MacArthur Foundation in 2013 to set up and lead our business programs, became chief executive in 2014, and worked as a global managing director at Accenture and a partner at McKinsey before that. Perhaps what I would say about Andrew, and hopefully he'll think this is a compliment, is that he's someone who has this combination of being able to understand the scale of disruption and innovation that's required to make the transition that we've been talking about over the course of these 8 weeks, while also having knowledge of the practical realities on the ground for many of the key stakeholders in the journey. So welcome to the From Linear to Circular program, Andrew.
And you need to unmute yourself, Andrew.
We've been on Zoom for 10 weeks now.
Oh, God. I thought you were going to do that for me. I thought we had a control panel somewhere. Anyway, thank you, Seb. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Delighted to see so many people from all around the world here today, and some dialing in very late at night and some early in the morning. So
we always have people, by the way, Andrew, from your native land of Australia joining us, even though it must be about 2 a.m. there.
Yeah, well done you. Good job.
Commitment is incredible of our participants. And Andrew, maybe a good place to start would be, what was your first encounter of the concept circular economy?
My first encounter was in 2012, when I actually stumbled across something about Ellen MacArthur, who I knew from sailing. I was a sailor previously, and I had followed her career in the Vendée Globe. I was working in Korea at the time, and I was watching the race from my basement on a live simulation, and I was tracking the Vendée Globe, and Ellen MacArthur popped up and was actually winning the race at one point, and I was just astounded that this young woman who no one had ever heard of was actually dominating this incredibly challenging race. And that stuck with me. And then 2012, something popped up and her name, and there was a connection to the circular economy. So I sort of looked into it. And as I looked into it, I discovered actually that they were looking for somebody to come and help work in the foundation to work on the business programs. And at the time, I was a management consultant, a strategy consultant. I'd been doing that for nearly 27 years, I think. And it sort of was really, it was a really interesting concept for me because it was framed in a particular way. It was about a different kind of an economy and a different kind of vision that just made sense. And I was immediately drawn to it, and felt also that I had something to offer. So I got in touch.
I remember, Andrew, you telling an anecdote once where you said to Ellen something along the lines of, it's a cracker of an idea.
Yes. I think that's, this is, it was interesting because I'd been interested in environmentalism and sustainability and been tracking this, all my life actually. And, we'd been tracking since the 60s and 70s, stories about pollution and all sorts of sort of environmental degradation, and everybody talking about, it's the system's broken. And all of the responses that we've seen over the years were really trying to mitigate a system that obviously couldn't work in the long run. And it wasn't until really I came across this idea that it was a bit, my experience, like many others, it was a bit like a light bulb, and you go, well, yeah, it's obvious. We need to actually think about an economic system that is building natural capital and is designed to work in the long run with a vision of a system that can work, rather than just trying to take on a system that clearly can't, and you just couldn't reconcile how you could grow an economy and extract resources and try to mitigate in a world where the population's growing, consumption's growing. It just didn't add up. And this idea struck me as a really very insightful and attractive concept, because you could see it working if we got it in place and scaled up.
And then you got a chance to become the chief executive officer of the foundation. And I wonder, given the fact that the ambition is so high of the foundation, were you ever daunted or intimidated by what we're trying to do? And how did you reconcile that?
It was always really funny because Ellen and I used to go to meetings together, and and she'd say something, with a group of business executives and or CEOs or board members, and she'd say something like, we just need to change the entire global economy. And I just sit there going, oh my God, that's pretty big. And you talk to these guys who sort of know what that means, and yeah, it's really it is about the economic operating system. It's a worldview shift that we're really seeking to influence. But as we have worked on this problem, we have an incredible team at the foundation, and we've always, from the earliest stages, sort of said that what we're really not interested in doing is having an incremental impact. We're looking to try to catalyze something that has a scale impact that matches the scale of the challenge. And we all know that the challenge of meeting the needs of a growing middle-class population globally, of a growing population globally within finite resources and fragile ecosystems, that's massively, massively challenging. And this notion of how can you actually come up with solutions and ideas that meet the scale of the challenge that we have. And I think we said all along that, we'd rather not do something incremental. We'd rather fail trying to do something that was at scale and met the challenge than do something incremental, is what I'm trying to say. And I think that sort of thinking really drove us into a problem-solving space that was really, massively challenging. But we can find analogues for the type of catalytic intervention we're looking at. We've seen systems change. We've seen the global economy change, radically over the last 15, 20 years with the opening up of global markets, the creation of global supply chains, the application of technologies, of information technologies. We've shifted from national economies to a global economy really in the last 15, 20 years. And so we know that systems can shift very, very quickly. And I think that's what actually the combination of saying, well, if we look at the problem we're trying to actually take on here as solutions that have the potential to meet the scale challenges they're addressing at a pace that needs to be equivalent to the growing challenges. How could we do that, and can we find analogs? And the answer is yes, we can. And and I think we've taken an approach that says that here's a massively ambitious objective and challenge. How can we bring the world's leading views on approaches, the tools that we use to create the global economy that we know today? How could we apply those to create a new economy in the future? The digital technologies, the business science, the management science, the logistics, the supply chains, the design, the material science. How can we orient them from an efficiency model in a linear sense to a new systems model that's regenerative and restorative and keeps materials in flow? And, I don't think that many people had asked that question before. And we felt that we had the possibility of bringing together these types of tools and approaches and methods and networks to come up with something that was different, a different approach, a different way of talking about the approach, the framing and language we used, and a different way of bringing people together to solve or develop solutions that were system solutions rather than just very narrow solutions such as product solutions or a sector solution. So
we're definitely going to talk quite a bit more about sort of systems change, if you like. And the way I read the way you answered Ilma's question, Andrew, is we're like a very big version of go big or go home. Pretty
much, but it's also not go big with the same approach. We're at our heart, I think, a radically innovative organization. We're trying to find radical innovation for approaches that can get us an outcome that's disproportionate to the scale of an organization that we are. We're looking for catalytic interventions.
And I guess you've already sort of talked quite a bit about the outcomes of the foundation, or some of the things the foundation works towards. But if you were to try and sum it up as simply as possible, what does the Ellen MacArthur Foundation do?
Well, we develop and promote the idea of a circular economy, and we essentially bring together networks of organizations to innovate solutions that can progress us in that direction. So, we're developing the idea, we have a vision, we're developing more understanding of what the circular economy is, how we can actually transition to it. But we're doing it with a network of relationships in business, in government, in cities, across learning, across sectors. So we actually we've created a set of relationships that allow us to work with, entire value chains, the entire ecosystem of an industry sector, for example. If we look at plastics, for the first time, we brought together the entire value chain to say, in order to address plastics and to keep it in an economy where it can continually be used, we don't just need to work with the polymer manufacturers, we need to work with everybody across that system, the brands and the cities where the plastics are used. So that's an example.
And it seems that at our work, we're really uniquely positioned to be able to pursue collaborations with the highest level of people and organizations. How did we manage to reach that position, or has it always been the case?
Once we started, the foundation initially had backing from a small group of CEOs who were a combination of relationships that Ellen had through her sailing career, sponsor organizations, and others that she met. So we had a few CEO relationships very early on. But then we very deliberately built our relationships with the executive suite, the boards of companies. And we built a very deliberate approach to engage with them with a discussion around the circular economy as an innovation opportunity that was economically very attractive and also delivered a range of other very important co-benefits. So in the early days, we knew that we needed to be able to prove the concept. So we engaged McKinsey & Company, which is a world-leading management consulting organization that's highly respected by business and CEOs. And we worked with them on the first proposal that sort of demonstrated the opportunity economically. And that got us a long way. But we were very deliberate in building a network of relationships that we could foster over years and progressively build up a case record, you know, a track record of evidence and of working with business to actually bring this idea to life. And that sort of became self-generating. We now work with over 1,000, well over 1,000 organizations actually.
And you could say, Andrew, I mean, the idea itself is the growth of the foundation has kind of been mirrored by the growth of the idea from something that in 2010, you know, there are very few references to circular economy, maybe outside of a few Chinese policy papers, to the point now where it's this, you know, you could say the idea has been mobilized. In fact, we do sometimes say the idea has been mobilized.
Yeah.
So what are the foundation's big goals or ambitions or focus areas moving forward from this point of widespread recognition of the circular economy?
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that over the last 10 years, the idea has come from really not really being understood at all to there now being, I'm not sure what the number is, over 100 million references on Google if you look it up now. And it's a pretty well established idea within specialist circles, I'd say, you know, interested circles, the close practitioners. So the idea is established. We have a lot of organizations now working on this topic, a lot of companies engaged, a lot of policy, a lot of governments and cities and policy being directed around this topic. So it's understood. I think that the shift now that we're really focused on is scaling the idea, which is to get it into the mainstream so that we get a much broader appreciation of the basic idea that, you know, if we keep, if we think about materials in the economy and we keep those in use longer and we keep them in the system longer and we valorize them by design rather than after the fact, that's a huge opportunity. And it also brings people into the discussion about the interrelatedness of these materials with other factors, whether it's, you know, the embedded energy that we have within products that we can keep in the system, which lowers the energy demand of the system and has a direct contribution to the climate change agenda and the objectives of climate change. We can have beneficial impact on water, on land use, on keeping finite materials in the system longer. So all of those play into it as well. So I think it's a combination of those things, Seb, really, that we've been really focused on.
And thinking about our future activities, one of the questions that we have received quite often actually in this webinar is about our work in different geographies.
Yeah.
And there was a particular question from David that was submitted on Slack saying that the foundation seems to be very focused on activities in Europe, US, Latin America. Do we have any plans to expand in other parts of the world, like Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand?
Yeah, we're already active in China. We have an office in Beijing. We've got a dozen people in China, and we're working very hard to create or establish the broader narrative of a circular economy in China. We did a big report there, and it's really interesting because China has, as I think Seb mentioned at the beginning, when 10 years ago, China was one of the leaders in industrial ecology, the notion of creating eco parks and joining up the outputs of one company as an input to another. And they could do that through their central planning. And they were also really concerned with material security. So they recognized that some minerals and other things were going to face scarcity unless they actually managed them in a circular way. But they had done less in the areas of circular economy, such as remanufacturing, reuse, secondary markets, sharing economy, etc., and in the regenerative agriculture space. So we did a big report and we talked about the economic opportunities in China, which are huge, and we're trying to create this bridge between what's happening in China, because there are areas of real world leadership in circular economy in China. It is the world's largest e-commerce economy, and lots of tremendous innovation occurring in that space. We're trying to make a bridge between what's happening in China and what's happening in other parts of the world. So that's an example. So definitely big in China. We are also looking at Africa. We're doing some work in Africa at the moment in the food topic. And we are creating a lot of multilingual assets and content that people can access from other countries: Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mandarin, and we'll continue to do that over time, expand out the languages that our open access information is available in. We're only a small organization, and we don't have the capacity to really expand to have offices all around the world. We don't have a vision to do that. We're very focused on having a very concentrated impact on major leverage points, the major actors in the system and major markets. But the rest of what we do is open source, and we're very keen to make that open source for other developing markets and other sectors, etc., that we're not focused on.
On Elma, sorry.
No, yeah, it's so a follow-up question to that. So when we do go to different geographies, do we consider the cultural on-the-ground realities in terms of how we frame even circular economy, or does the framing, the concept itself, remain unchanged?
Yeah, no, definitely. There are quite different contextual considerations to take into account, and we're very focused on the notion of product service systems in context. So, I think that this whole contextual, whether it's materials or societal contexts, will become more nuanced and more further explored, I think, as people pick this up and apply it locally. There are underlying principles that we believe are across all of these sectors: the notion of designing out wastes and pollution, keeping materials in use at their highest value for as long as possible, and regenerating natural systems. I mean, they're principles that apply, but clearly in different markets, in different geographies, different setups, that they will be applied in different ways. And we're trying to build more and more case examples that show the range of different applications and different expressions of these principles in these different settings and contexts. And we try to point to others as well who are doing things in those markets that we haven't directly had an involvement in, but bring these ideas to life.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. We're going to move topics slightly. We've already talked about this a little bit, but it seems like a really important point for me to dwell on for a moment. We talked a lot about systems. In fact, it'd be interesting to get the transcripts from all these webinars and count up the number of times we talk about systems. You already mentioned that, like in the space when it was pre-circular economy, there was a lot of talk about we need to change the system.
Yeah.
There's also been a lot of change historically, but this notion of deliberately enacting system change, actually doing it, there's not actually that many examples historically to show how an organization like ours or combination organizations might try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting. We, as you point out, I mean, we know that the conversation around systems and the interrelatedness of systems and the need to think about the redesign of systems it's been a topic for many, many years. And there's been a huge amount of work done looking at how to map systems, how to visually present them, how to understand the dynamics of them. But if we look at this from an economic perspective and say, okay, you know, I'm the world's largest fast-moving consumer goods company, and I want to become circular economic, it's actually impossible for them to do it on their own. They have to do it with their value chain, their suppliers. They have to do it with the consideration of the context, the cities, the geographies, the countries they're operating within. And this became, for us, became more and more evident as we were working with CEOs at the World Economic Forum in 2013 and 14. And we created this initiative called Project Mainstream. And we brought together at that stage around 12 CEOs, and we were saying, you know, how could we think about collectively looking at this problem of changing systems? And at that time we said, this is 2013, we said, well, let's pick a few materials and do some work cases. And plastics was one we chose, and we chose it because it was a really high volume, low value material stream that everybody had an association with, everybody was working with, everybody had a problem with it, but we didn't know how big it was at that stage. And, you know, it was really interesting because I talked to the CEOs and they'd say, well, you know, I'm only 2% of the global materials on market. I can't fix this myself, and I only represent that narrow vertical slice of the system. So we have to find a new way of solutioning. And that's what we spent our time on, was really trying to find an approach that could bring together not only the actors across the system, but what are the various tools and methods and approaches we could apply to solution for systems. So, and again, if you think of plastics, you know, here is a material that is, you know, technologically really quite extraordinary. It's very cheap, very light, very strong, and keeps material, you know, keeps your food fresh for a long time. But, you know, we don't know what to do with it at the end of use. And there was so we mapped it out, and we brought the system together, and we understood, we did a huge amount of research at that stage to understand, you know, the dynamics of the global plastics material flow as a system. And we just really, again, focused very much on how could we create a new approach that brings the various actors together that would actually allow the system to shift. And we talked about the need for common vision. We talked about the need for transparency and metrics so that we could understand the material flows. We talked about the need for innovation that was systems innovation versus vertical innovation, because what we could see.
Andrew, what do you mean by vertical versus
yeah, I was
systems?
Just say that when we first brought all these people together, they said we can point to all these different innovations for it could be packaging innovation, or it could be recycling innovation, or it could be a particular demonstration of a way of you know, reducing the impact of the plastic. But all of these things, and there were thousands of them. We mapped thousands of innovations, and we said this is sort of interesting because everybody's trying to find solutions, but none of them actually are able to scale and become a system solution. They always had very narrow applications, and they were designed by the different parts of the value chain. And also we had the situation where the product packaging people were innovating at a tremendous pace. So, you know, the pouches and all the new packaging formats coming out. So you had that, you know, the clock speed of that was really fast. And then you had the recycling industry that was based in municipalities all around the world with a clock speed going incredibly slowly, and the two things didn't connect. So by the time you introduce the new material, you've only just sort of put the infrastructure in place for the material that was designed, you know, 4 years ago. So we said you had to think of this as a material flow across the system, and, you know, we had to fundamentally rethink the way in which we were designing solutions for a system. So that was
and then what do we do? What did we do, Andrew?
Well, establish the global. In that example, we established the global vision. We actually got the actors from across the value chain to agree that this is the common vision that we want for the system. So we defined the vision. We just defined the vision together. And then we said, okay, to progress towards that vision, we need to collectively move towards a set of objectives. So the design of all materials that go on market need to be recyclable according to technical definitions that are common, reusable, common definitions, or compostable, common definitions. So everybody in that commitment has committed to the same vision and the same objectives by 2025. And by doing that, and these were the actors, so that was the polymer manufacturers, the packaging manufacturers, the brands, the cities, the recycling infrastructure, all having the same objective, vision and set of targets. We could then say globally, we are able to start to orient the system towards a new solution space that was common for the system. And it's the first time that's been done. And we now have over 800 organizations in that commitment, well over 20% of the global production of plastics on market. And we have, in addition to those two things, the vision and the commitment, we have plastics pacts, which are country-based initiatives in now, I think, something like 12 countries. I've lost track. We've got a pipeline of countries that are doing this. And each one of those country initiatives are taking into account the local context and the local setup to be able to express the vision and the targets into a specific country's execution. So that was a prototype that we did as an example of a systems transformation. As I said, we chose plastics as a material. We could have chosen, lots of others, but we sensed that would be a really good one. And when we did the research and came out with the analysis that showed there'd be more plastics in the ocean than fish, we were able to capture the global imagination and get the more and more companies to commit, and get the combination of companies committing on a common solution, a mobilized awareness of the problem in the community, and policy that's starting to align with that. Those three things are lined up. So that was a model for an approach that we can then apply in other areas such as fashion and food and durable goods, et cetera, et cetera.
And we have talked about these areas in the previous webinars. We talked about new plastics economy and the vision that we have for a circular economy of plastics. We talked about circular vision for fashion, for food. And we also talked about how innovation and collaboration are the key aspects to bring this vision about. And in all areas, we had plenty of examples of businesses already doing great things. And yet there is this pervasive feeling that why has it not reached scale yet if we have been talking about it for quite a while? Or one of the questions where we received on Slack was that there was a person saying that 25 years ago in a business school, he was talking about economy decoupled from the use of resources. Mm-hmm. And yet 25 years later, which is today, we're still facing the same problem, but we don't have another 25 years to solve this problem. Yeah. So why are we in the situation that we are? Why hasn't it taken up on a more massive scale yet?
Well, again, I think that there certainly have been academic papers. There have been calls for this type of solution for many years. This is this is not a new idea as such. What we've done is we've picked up that idea and we've added a number of others to it. And I think what we're by taking a different approach to mobilizing, developing and promoting the idea and engaging a network and demonstrating with plastics as an example, what we have done as an organization is we have created a different type of NGO really that is working with a wide range of actors on a number of different topics concurrently to orchestrate the various parts of this solution. And part of it is the answer. Another part of it is demonstrating the possibilities, so showing that it can work. Showing the economics of it, showing that it's universally applicable, that it's got a range of other benefits, climate it's a framework solution that addresses many things, and building not only awareness, but real solutions, tangible case examples, and communicating this in a way that people can understand. So it's the combination of those things that are needed to transform an industry or a sector or an economy. It's not one thing, it's not just the answer. And transformation is it's a tough game because, companies, we can look at the history of very successful companies who have built their businesses and been very successful for many, many years, but then a technology changes or a factor in the environment changes, and the businesses go out of business very quickly. Very few companies are able to reinvent themselves and transform, because it's a tricky game, because you have to work across many fronts and orchestrate across many fronts. So I think that the other factors is that these macro forces that are becoming more and more apparent. There is more social societal understanding. There's more technical understanding. There's more operational understanding of climate risk and what that actually means. And if you look at the pandemic, that we're experiencing now, this is not an unexpected event, just as climate change impact is not an unexpected event. It's just happened at a pace that was unexpected. The coronavirus impact has massively affected healthcare systems, but also the economy. And I think that's forcing transformation. It's forced innovation. We've seen things happen that have happened at a pace. So you need, I think, an awareness of, I think the COVID is interesting, because I think that will wake people up to that climate is very much like COVID, but it's just playing out at a slower pace. The risks are very tangible risks, and we need to transform. But we've also got the biodiversity, we've also got water, we've also got land. So all of these things, and we've also got a recognition of the growing demand on the system with population growth and the middle class consumption growth. 3 billion new middle class consumers entering the market over the next 10 years or so. And I think people are now really starting to understand that the limits of a linear economy, we can feel them. We're seeing the evidence of it, and we know how to transform, but we need to have the combination of these things: the understanding of the solutions, the political will, the economic advantage, and I think that's starting to come into play, and that's why the circular economy is getting picked up as much as it is, and we're starting to see many companies now being champions of this idea, because they recognize that this is a solution space that responds to these macro trends, which are undeniable and unavoidable, and you're either on the right side of it or the wrong side of it.
So talking about these companies, these companies that champion the idea of circular economy and the way we work with them, there was another great question that I would like to bring in, and it's the role that we play when we engage with them, and how much do we accept what they suggest, the commitments that they just suggest, and how much do we actually challenge them? Maybe even have some stories to share about how we managed to challenge some companies to increase their commitments in the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Plastics Global Commitment is an example of the foundation actually challenging the industry. We worked initially with one of our companies to come up with that commitment to 100% recyclable, reusable or compostable by 2025. We worked with Unilever on that in 2017. And that may not sound like a particularly challenging agenda, but it's massively challenging. That requires a company like that produces over 2 billion packaged goods every single day of the year around the world to fundamentally redesign and re-equip their entire production systems. That's a really big challenge. So some of it they've got to get right out of, and some of it they've got to, completely retool, and some of it they've got to find new material innovations, new business models. So it's a really big deal. We worked with them on that, and it was hugely challenging. We helped them to shape the business case. They took it to their board. They came public with that at Davos in 2017. 6 months later, we had another half a dozen global leading brands say, we're also going to make that commitment. And as I said before, now we have around 800 organizations around the world who are, again, working towards that commitment one way or another, with around 400 of them as signatories. Now it's one thing to actually make a commitment, it's another thing to deliver it. But we have built into this approach transparency that's never been there before, which actually talks very specifically about progress against commitment. And we're working with regulators and policymakers around the world to orient their policies to enable that shift to occur, and also to create the conditions for these leading companies to be able to innovate and bring new solutions into space, into the marketplace. So it's a combination of these things, and we absolutely have challenged the businesses that we work with, and we have, we have been actually, I think, delighted by many of them who have actually stepped up, and we've even got to a situation now where they're challenging us back, and it's really quite nice that we have this very dynamic environment where we're saying, we understand that these are the solutions that we need to identify and scale. So together, how do we actually do that? The companies have one part of the answer, and we have another part of it, because we represent a network and we have different capabilities within the foundation and assets. And it's a very interesting dynamic that is, I think, proving to be quite productive.
And I mean, you give that example, Andrew, that specific example of Unilever. One of the things that makes our organization kind of distinct has been our ability to communicate circular economy at the highest level in organizations and institutions. We haven't got stuck in the sustainability department having conversations. There's a couple of questions in the chat about this. There are a couple of questions submitted beforehand. Why are CEOs at such a high level so fascinated or intrigued or willing to engage with the circular economy?
Well, I think it's really interesting. It's not always the same answer, because I think there are CEOs and there are organizations that are more predisposed to what's now been referred to more as stakeholder economics. They are more concerned about societal aspects of business. And so, I mean, IKEA is a very good example. We announced IKEA yesterday as a new strategic partner of the foundation. I mean, IKEA originally created its business model off the byproduct waste of sawmills. They took sawdust and created particle board and created the Billy bookshelf. And many of us on the call have got Billy bookshelves, and we know how pervasive that's become. But they were always sort of interested in efficiency, and they were interested in design, and they were interested in better solutions. And they talked about democratizing design and getting that into every household. Over the years, they've been looking at waste, and many companies start with a view of how do we eliminate waste? And companies are really good at eliminating waste within their narrow confines. They're very efficiency oriented, and so IKEA was looking at their waste, and they said, yeah, we can get so far with that. They looked at the materials, and they said, yeah, we can get so far with that. They started to look at products, and we said, yeah, we can create really good products, but if people throw them in landfill, that's not going to, that doesn't work. Or, so how do we think about products that actually sit within a system so that they can be reused and repaired and kept in use? So now they're talking about business models. So how do we actually lease things? How do we provide access? So their journey has been from, really the waste end all the way up. But that has always for them been a CEO agenda. It's always been how do we innovate the business? How do we bring better design for better solutions that are both economically really attractive? So how do we bring high quality design at low price so everybody can access it? The democratization of better design. How do we actually bring better system solutions to people at lower price? So they're very oriented that way as an organization. Others, come at it from, depending on the industry and depending on where their interests are. A Unilever, for example, sells products that have been around for, in some cases, nearly more than 100 years. Solvo's soap and, Dove and Hellmann's mayonnaise. They're not sexy products. I mean, they're, but they're very
That
focused
depends,
on.
Andrew, really, doesn't it?
Well, I think, they would argue that they're about innovating branding and innovating. So they're very concerned about their customers as well. And they know that their customers are, 30-year-old single people who are informed about environmental issues and are actually concerned about where the provenance of their products. And, so they're very interested in innovation for the brand that engages with contemporary customer values. So theirs is a slightly different angle on this, but so I think that there are different takes on it depending on the sector, depending on the company culture, the company setup. But for underlying all of for all of them, it's about how do they remain relevant and gain competitive advantage. And being relevant these days means actually having an interest in the business in society. It's not just being an extractive industry, which we used to call mining companies were extractive industries, but these days people are recognizing that all linear economy businesses are extractive industries. And you've got to get out of that and say, how does business actually operate in a way that when we're successful and grow a business, we're growing value for society, not just for extractive purposes that go to a small set of shareholders. And that evolution of capitalism really is in play as well. So many companies are really, concerned around how do they position within a societal context, and their brands are recognized as being a positive societal force. So, varies.
So I think given the number of conversations you have had through your work here at the foundation with all kinds of people, including people at the very top, I think our audience would really appreciate to hear a bit more about how do you personally prepare when you know there will be a new person you'll have to speak about circular economy. And you already said that it really depends probably on who they are, what industry they're part of, what company they're part of. But is there a certain approach that you take? Like, how do you bring these circular economy arguments to the conversation? How do you get yourself ready for that?
Well, I think there is an underlying commonality of the narrative, which is that, the circular economy is about innovation and opportunity. It's about innovation for better solutions for people. And that transpires pretty well across many, most industries. You're trying to find innovative ways of meeting the customer needs, the human needs first, better, because the circular economy is essentially about providing better solutions for people. And it should be. We're not trying to design sustainable solutions for people who are sustainably woke. That's not what we're on about. Because there is a proportion of people who are really looking for better solutions. There's a whole other very significant part of society who are just trying to get through the day as easily as possible and as cheaply as possible and being able to afford things. And we have to provide solutions for people that are just better solutions. So, that underpins everything. It's about design. It's not about, as I said, a lot of people and companies come into this from a end of pipe waste perspective. What can I do with a waste byproduct? What can I do with my product when it's wasted? Or what can we do with, byproduct or byproducts of production as waste? But the circular economy, that's important. It's part of it. But actually the bulk of it is, how do we design it out entirely, totally from the beginning? How do we rethink? So the rethinking of design, the principle of designing solutions that meet needs but respect and deliver the principles of a circular economy is common pretty much across every conversation, and it plays out in different ways depending on the sector and the product and whatever else.
We are almost, I mean, we've only got 10 minutes left, Andrew. In fact, we've got less than 10 minutes left by the
Time is
time.
flying in this
Ilma
conversation.
and I do our little bit at the end. It's always really exciting. But we haven't spoken much about quite a big topic, and we sourced questions before the webinar on this. I've seen a few pop up in the Q&A as well. Obviously, it's understandable why people want to talk about COVID, because we've pretty much had nothing but COVID in our own lives.
Yeah.
10 weeks.
Yep.
I could sum up some of the questions maybe by saying, does the COVID pandemic make circular economy more likely, less likely, or no effect at all?
Well, I think that to give the short answer, that all those forces we talked about pre-existing COVID, many of those have just been amplified and accelerated by the pandemic. Demonstrating the fragility of global supply chains, demonstrating the potential for innovation at pace that we never knew was possible, demonstrating the shift in behavior from going to shops to online e-commerce. We've seen a huge acceleration of pre-existing trends, and I think that's super interesting, because that, in combination with the moment in time to reflect on, what does this mean? We've seen the whole global economy grind to a halt for the first time ever. And what does that tell us about the potential risk and impact of similar known challenges, such as climate change? So I think, the combination of what we're seeing is evidence of changes in behavior and changes in the ability to act and innovate, all those types of things, plus the reflection on these challenges, I think is really amplifying that the solutions that we need to be system solutions. They need to be able to come into effect at scale and pace, that they need to meet the solutions that we're looking for, need to be matched to the size of the challenges that we see. And I think that the pandemic has really raised the awareness of that across geographies, across sectors. The finance sector, it's really interesting that I was on a call that Larry Fink was presenting on just before this one. Larry Fink's the CEO of the world's largest asset management company called BlackRock, and he was observing that the investment funds that are oriented towards ESG, more sustainable investments, have outperformed through the crisis, and which means that they've done better. So there's a combination of people looking at these things, and I think they will have an effect coming out the other side. And this whole notion of the relevance of circular economy, it's more relevant than ever, and there's an opportunity for really thinking about how we build back better coming out of the pandemic, because we have to find new growth, and we have to find job opportunities, but let's find them in the places that build towards a better longer term outcome.
We had a great question lined up about BlackRock and finance, Andrew, which you've sort of cut off at the pass. Let me ask you a slightly different question. What are you at all worried about, kind of dilution of the term, or greenwashing, or any of those kinds of aspects sort of becoming attached to the circular economy agenda?
I think it's interesting that what we are observing is, for most people, most organizations, the journey from the circular economy being about better recycling, or what do we do with waste, a lot of people start there, and there is a risk of it getting stuck there. But I think it's a really low risk, because actually what we've seen consistently is, when you get into that conversation, you realize the limits of it very, very quickly. You can't fix the plastics problem through recycling alone. It just isn't possible. And there's more and more evidence that, so you get into the topic and you get drawn upstream more and more and more. And as you get drawn upstream, you get drawn into the interrelationships more and more. And it does force you to find a new approach. So I'm not particularly worried about that, actually, because I think, you know, it is a systems change is quite complex for some, you know, for people to get their minds around. You've got to find a way into it, but you inevitably get drawn up into the need for more upstream design and system solutions. So more talk about circular economy wherever it is in my mind good.
So this has been an incredible hour. Thank you so much, Andrew. And I think we have time just for one brief question. And given that we have hundreds of people watching this webinar live, and we'll probably have more hundreds, if not thousands, re-watching it afterwards. And you know, these are the people from all over the world that have become really passionate about circular economy. So what would be the message you would like to leave them with? Well,
I think we've touched on a lot of them, actually, but I think the message is that really the circular economy is a bigger idea. The circular economy is really an idea about systems and the interrelatedness of systems and the need to design better system solutions. So, you know, my takeaway would be, you know, think of the circular economy as a bigger idea for solutions that address global challenges. Think of it in terms of it's a framework solution for systems thinking. And I think, you know, the more people start to think about, you know, how do we actually affect systems change with the circular economy as a vision and a set of principles, the better.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for making the time to answer that barrage of questions that we've thrown at you over the last 15 minutes. Yes, we've got, and there's way more than we can possibly get to in this time. But so thank you everyone who's tuned in and posted those questions through and shared their points of view in the comments section as well. I do want to challenge you guys now. So it's week 8 and we are sadly coming to the end of this particular program. Once again, for those of you asking about the Slack channel, it will be open beyond the 10 weeks. So all the stuff in there. But what we want to challenge you to do this week, we want to have a bit of fun with you. We don't want this just to be us sharing stuff with you. We want you to, we'll post this obviously in the Slack. We want you to have a go at pitching the circular economy. We want you to do a 30-second video, tell us who you're pitching it to, and make the case for a circular economy as succinctly as you can. It's a great way to practice, a great way to get feedback from other people in the group, and we'll also share our own feedback. So there is a little resource that we've made about it which could help as well, and we'll share all those details in the Slack. And
someone was saying that they are not allowed into elevators. Actually, that's a bit of a challenge given the circumstances. But hey.
Record yourself in an elevator or a similar situation, whether it's on a Zoom call or in your garden having a beer with your dad, whatever situation where you find yourself in a situation where you might need to do a really quick, what is the circular economy pitch, or make the case for why it's a cool idea. We'd love to see your videos also on site, as it were.
Yes. And as usual, we ask you to go back to your learning trios and have a reflection, and we will share the instructions on how to do it on Slack as we normally do. And then on to the next slide. So just some information about the 2 upcoming webinars. So next week we have another great conversation with Hunter Lovins, and we'll talk about regenerative agriculture and also climate change. So make sure you tune in. And we're closing in 2 weeks' time, and we will speak about how can we build back better. And we have another great speaker, I'm really excited about that actually, lined up for you. So make sure you tune in.
And finally, by popular demand, we are going to try a version of Zoom networking. So there's a number of people already signed up. It's tomorrow, 5:30 BST, as the slide says. Registration is in the Slack channel, in the general Slack channel. Basically, we are, there's been lots of call for people to get to know each other better. So we've set this up and we'll be just using randomized breakout rooms for however long you want to join us for. Well, up to an hour. We're not going to be there all night. But so join us for drinks, dinner, lunch, breakfast, 11Cs, wherever it is in your time zone. And obviously, if it goes well, we'll do more of those.
Brilliant. And that's all from us today. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week.